We've brought together two of the authors of the UK Strategic Defence Review to discuss how things look 4 months on, and what has not happened since, and then what we can do and what other countries can learn from the SDR process and its implementation as well. So for that, we have Grace Cassy, CyLon Ventures, and General Sir Richard Barrons, Universal Defence and Security. And moderating this panel is Shashank Joshi from The Economist. Give him a big round of applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm really pleased to welcome to the stage two people who were at the heart of the UK's Defence Review that was published just 4 months ago, General Sir Richard Barrons and Grace Cassy. Richard, Grace, very warm welcome. Just to set the mood for a minute, 4 months on from the review, your review offered some quite serious proposals on defence reform, new senior positions like a National Armaments Director. That position hasn't been filled 4 months on, and it was really at the core of the vision you outlined for reform. You talked about 10% of new investment going on novel technologies. The message I've heard from lots of people and companies in the audience is that they are not seeing those funds spent in ways that would allow their companies to survive, and that lots of the funding will not come for another 2 years in some cases. And the mood inside the Ministry of Defence, as far as I understand it, is in some cases fairly grim. So starting with you, Richard, on a scale of 1 to 10, how depressed are you feeling about progress?
On a good day, I'm on a 3. And I blame myself for some of that, because when we concluded the review, what we should have done was not hand over the review and then it proceeds to implementation. What we should have done is agree a number of things that were going to happen anyway so that there was seamless progress. And I regret that, but it didn't happen. But what has happened in the intervening 4 months is very little, and some of that I can forgive, and some of that I think it now needs to be sorted out.
Very succinct. Grace?
Yeah,
I would. 3? Are you higher, lower? Where are you?
I would probably be around a 3 as well.
Okay.
I'm afraid. I wish I was higher, but I'm not. I think my biggest concern, as you've intimated in your opening, is the slow pace that we're seeing. And I think everyone in this room, understands that time is one thing we're not blessed with an excess of at the moment on this agenda, and that really we need to move far faster than we are. And that does concern me. I think the lack of appointment of a National Armaments Director is very frustrating, both to us on the review team and I'm sure to many others inside Defence. I think that there are some things around that process that were outside of the control of Defence, so I don't think we can entirely kind of batter them with it, but nonetheless, it was a very lengthy process and could possibly have been accelerated if the message around tempo was more internalised. But I share the concerns that many companies and investors here have expressed around not yet seeing the money flowing to a kind of wider supplier base, a more diverse supplier base of younger, innovative companies. The Defence, UK Defence Intelligence, another body that our review requested to be created. I think that's been pretty slow in the standing up as well. It's unclear how the money's going to flow. Is it going to be UKDI that deploys that ring-fence 10% that you mentioned? Is it something else? There's a lot of uncertainty, and my view is that we just need to get on and do some stuff, because narrative is not enough any longer.
Yeah. So a lot of what you're saying is urgency and pace and speed. Can you just clarify what is preventing us from going faster?
So first of all, we need to acknowledge there was always a tension in the structure of the review and its outcome between the nature and urgency of the transformation we described, the most significant for 150 years. And our narrative, I gave it 11 out of 10. So there was no doubt where we needed to go and what we needed to do. But we were also asked, and what do you get for this funding profile? And although that changed in mid-flight,
Sure.
the fact is we're saying in the world you live in and all the things you've got to do, you need to do this transformation at a speed that's driven by the world. And you don't own the clock or the benchmarks.
Yeah.
The money says you might get there in 10 years. And by the way, everybody knew that for the next 2 years, people were on lean rations. There was no more money until 27, 28. So we shouldn't be surprised. It's been a struggle in year. In fact, in many ways, it's gone backwards because the money issue has got harder and the delivery has got weaker. But to fix this, the first thing that needs to happen is the top 4 leaders of the Ministry of Defence who report to the Defence Secretary at official level, the Director of Nuclear Organisation in place. CDS just changed. This is about week 3. PUS now interviewing for a successor. NAD not yet appointed. An appointment that we said should be sat next to us when we announced, but the system didn't really keep up with that. So those 4 people must drive the change, and it's their job. And if they can't do it, then they'll find someone else to do it. Then the reorganisation beneath that, so the Ministry Strategic Headquarters, the NAD Group, the new Department of State, they've all got new models, and it's an elegant design, but not yet functioning. And part of that is cultural, and part of that is about staffing it. So they need to make this leaner organisation work within its stovepipes and between them. That would be good. And then they need a plan. Now, we were promised the investment plan in September. And it's going to be late. But that's the magic spreadsheet that connects money to programs to which industry can attach and provides a degree of certainty. Could they please stop trying to boil the ocean and get the early bits out now so that we can get on with things? Now, all of that's quite a lot to do.
Can I just press you on one bit of this? So they need a plan. Some of your review is very bold. You've got sections on the hybrid air wing, a concept that's then been fleshed out by the new First Sea Lord. But it's not fleshed out in enormous detail as to say, this is how hybrid it needs to be. This is the proportion of crewed and uncrewed we'd like to see in great detail. Do you regret not being more specific in ways that would have forced the government and forced the ministry to move quicker? Grace, why don't I start with you on that? Then.
Yeah, I mean, Richard will have his views. I do regret that we were not more specific on that. I think to some extent, a strategic defence review is supposed to be quite high level, and you're not necessarily encouraged to be too focused on precise tactical requirements.
You were never doing a full orbit of capabilities.
No, so I think that was not what we were tasked to do. But my personal opinion is that I think if we had given more of a clear sense of that, it might have made it harder to steer around some of these things.
Yes.
And on a similar note, one of my personal regrets from the process was that I probably focused too much on winning the principle of the 10% ring fence for novel technology, and definitely not enough time on defining what I meant by novel technology and making sure that it couldn't be hypothecated to F-35s or, new submarines and so on, because it's very easy to say there's lots of novel technology.
Everything is novel.
Everything's novel. Great. Let's say that our next F-35 we'll just hypothecate that to the 10%. And that wasn't the spirit of what was intended by the ring fence, which was really intended to drive the different kind of industrial partnership that many companies in this room are keen to.
What you're describing is maybe uncharitably slightly malicious compliance.
Yeah, I mean, or consent and evade, as it's known across the MOD, where it's very easy to say, yeah, great idea, novel tech, ring fence, love it, and then just kind of find ways to appear to comply, as you say.
Richard?
So I wish we'd done 2 things in the early phases of the implementation. The first is I wish could have been more specific about some of these early steps in crewed, uncrewed, autonomous, and the creation of a digital autonomy. But that was the level of detail that the MOD felt was implementation, and they haven't any money because we're still in this 2 years before the money starts to get even slightly better. So that was a shame. The second thing that I think was a mistake that's become clearer is that we say in the review, completely new industrial partnership with industry and also private finance, without which this does not work. And then I think we assumed that the MOD would very quickly, under the National Armaments Director they've not yet appointed, lay out how that was going to work. And almost none of that has really happened. What I now think we should have said is, could those people who understand private finance, from big banks to VC and PE, and those people in industry who understand how to do digital, could they please come and tell the MOD how this works? They've read the document, and this is how this works now. That's a really high-level conversation, because waiting for the MOD to set this out is going to be a long and potentially disappointing wait. However, the thing I absolutely sure was right to do is we described an evolving transformation that's by design never finished, because you're going to change the armed forces at the speed of innovation that is coming all the time from the private sector. So if we tried to say what that was, we would have committing the sin of undoing the logic of what we were prescribing. So we shouldn't have said, this is what it looks like in 2035. But they do need to work it out and how to get there.
Just on the point about the private finance, maybe a bright spot is that we did in the review say that there ought to be created a Defence Investors Advisory Group to do exactly what you're describing, and that is coming together because they are appointing people. People are going through the various vetting procedures and so on to make that possible. So that is in hand.
These are people with deep knowledge
people
of
in the
capital,
yeah,
private
exactly
capital,
right, exactly.
applying
Yes.
that to defence.
Yes. So there are things that are being done and things are being responded to, but even in those cases, perhaps not quite at the pace that we'd like.
Can I dive into one specific area? And Richard, you very briefly had a breath on this, which is the digital targeting web, or kill web. And it's, as someone who has been at Joint Forces Command, in its 2 iterations ago, as the names change, you know all about the long and convoluted history of the UK attempting to create the equivalent of digital targeting webs. That's an interesting recommendation because there was a date on it. You put a date on it and said you want a minimum viable product by April 26? 2027. What is the progress towards that?
So there is progress. I mean, obviously I'm not a public servant, so kind of how would I know?
Yes.
But as I understand it,
You're probably better cited than most of us on this.
Yeah, there is definitely progress in the MOD led by what's now called Cyber and Specialist Operations Command in stitching together the things that they have. And they have the advantage of they've got great insight from how things are being done in Ukraine, which the UK has had a hand in developing, and what they see coming from very different settings like Gaza. So it's not as if they've got to make it up. You've just got to stitch together the things that you already have. And that means moving more quickly in things like secure cloud, the AI that will run that amount of data. But they have sensors, and they have an array of weapons. Unfortunately, many of these weapons, when they were built, were built so that they couldn't be connected to other things, and that's ancient madness never to be repeated. So I get there's some challenges, but start by stitching together what you've got. And when they do that, could they please not just look at a British solution? They must, by design, have this conversation with the members of the Joint Expeditionary Force, because that's going to be much more valuable. None of this is difficult. You just need to make it happen.
Grace, can I just zoom out for a minute and look at some of the elements of the strategic defence review that go beyond defence reform and technology and finance? The review essentially doubles down on the alliance with the United States, the importance of the centrality of the United States to UK defence. In light of the big political changes taking place all the time, are you sort of content with that judgment in the review still? How much more might you hedge today than you would have done 4 months ago, if at all?
I think that there are some fundamental realities in our relationship with the US, particularly around our targeting enterprise, actually, the data that we get from the United States.
Which is rooted in a Five Eyes intelligence apparatus.
Deeply rooted in decades of a relationship that we would be unwise to try to throw out and replace in short order. So I think we have to be very realistic about where those dependencies lie for us. So I don't think I would rewrite 4 months later what we'd said about the US, but I do think I would like to see an acceleration of some of the work with, as Richard says, the Joint Expeditionary Force partners and wider NATO partners and in Europe to accelerate some of the more this side of the Atlantic capabilities and partnerships that I think could deliver more for us if they were invested in.
Richard, one of the most interesting bits of the review is the bits that think really hard about deterrence by punishment. You say the UK in the review needs more options for escalation dominance, and that's a phrase in the review. And we've previously thought about that gap that exists between Storm Shadow at the low end, Trident at the high end. How much do you think 4 months on the UK is thinking through how to fill that gap?
So I think there's quite a lot of good thinking about what escalation dominance really means. It includes resilience, by the way. It's not just the punishment you can inflict on your opponent. And the gap between a strategic nuclear capability and conventional forces was something that was considered a lot in the review. The government has elected to buy into the free-fall nuclear tactical weapons. That seems to me a short-term solution, rooted in quite a lot of decades of thinking about that. But everybody knows the future of the evolution of kill webs with global ranges are going to be very long-range precision conventional fires, including hypersonic missiles and glide vehicles. And so some of that actually does already exist. So don't invent it again. Just please buy one that works and evolve it. Some of it is going to take some time to come. None of it is in the funding for the next 2 years. And I'm sure we may come to this, but there is this challenge that in the review, some stuff you really, really need now, like integrated air and missile defense, long-range precision fires, is not remotely affordable either at all right now or not until the 2030s. And the world may not think that that is a cool idea.
Well, I think this is exactly what I wanted to kind of conclude our conversation on, which is the timeline. You have a clear sense that a lot of this unfolds over 10 years, and indeed that is the deadline set at the Hague summit for 3.5% as a political target. In reality, you have the NATO Secretary General saying that the threat unfolds over 5 years, if that, and some Baltic and Nordic states saying that the Russian army is reconstituting much more quickly than we would previously have assumed. So there is that enormous discrepancy. Grace, how do we bridge that gap?
Well, one bright spot, just to start with, and I'll come on to answer your question, is that I am very encouraged to see that we have finally let the contract for Secret Cloud. That has been holding back an awful lot of potential innovation and acceleration across a number of capabilities. That has taken a very, very long time to happen, but it has now happened. And
that data was previously siloed. It wasn't in a
and so we didn't have the capability to run cloud services at secret level. So, and if NATO fights at secret, we were fighting with, without the most basic kind of modern capabilities. So we have that. That's a bright spot. I think I would say the acceleration point, increasingly I feel that we can't just expect defense to fix this on its own, because it is still incentivized by an oversight system that fundamentally prioritizes value for money rather than pace and appropriate level of risk taking. And I would like to see, whether it's number 10, the Public Accounts Committee, the Treasury, accepting that for this 10-year to 5-year or frankly sooner telescoping to take place, they need to accept a different level of risk, and they need to hold defense accountable, not just for whether public money was spent appropriately, but whether it was spent fast enough and whether the results are keeping pace with the real world. Because we could easily have programs that deliver, quote, on time, but that's on time in a Whitehall sense. Is it on time in the sense of where we need it in the real world?
Richard, final word from you on that problem of timelines and whether actually you need capabilities, as the Americans might say, by 2027, not by 2032.
So I think this was evident in that tension I described at the start, that we have a published SGR and an evolving program that reflects the 10-year funding line. And that funding line is driven by what the government thinks it can afford for defense in a very tough fiscal climate, and essentially is a judgment about how much money you can put into defense as you're not putting into welfare if you can't tax or borrow anymore. And then there is the real world, which is moving at the speed of events beyond our control. I think the test case for this is there likely to be some form of ceasefire or settlement in Ukraine. And when that comes, and when then we talk about deterrence by escalation dominance, and the government has agreed we'd underpin that, well, that conversation will come sooner. So the issue is, if you want to do this transformation faster, and you really should, given the world, you're going to have to find more money sooner. And the dilemma, not for the government, because they're not up for electoral suicide, the question for the citizens of this country is, You're going to have less welfare on the terms you like in order to have more warfare. And please, could you choose to make that change sooner rather than later, because you're running too much risk.
Yeah, and it's I think that's articulated extremely well across this conversation. We've talked about leadership, we've talked about funding, we've talked about sort of the changing culture, Grace, you tackled, the discrepancy in timelines. Thank you both very much for allowing me to pepper you with such a wide range of questions and answering them so candidly and honestly. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.